see that there's something amazing here.
Did NASA create a convenient malfunction to hide archaeological evidence of alien life?
If some people want to go far beyond the edge of what's accepted in terms of imagery, see patterns on the rocks of Mars or on the Moon or in the rings of Saturn, my view to that is mazel tov. Go ahead, do it. Try it out. Make the proposals.
These objects, if you measure carefully from the tops of the 5 that surround this city square point, you find an almost perfectly symmetrical pentagon.
The Brookings Institution prepared a report for NASA. It contains a shocking recommendation.
There is a section on what might occur if evidence of extraterrestrial existence was found on other planets. They said that NASA or the government might want to consider keeping the information from the public. The reason being that it could cause widespread social unrest and possible deterioration of government control.
NASA claims the observer had an electrical failure.
It did not lose transmission. They turned it off. And they turned it off after the instructions for going into orbit had been uploaded to the spacecraft. It was possible then that the spacecraft would go ahead, follow out those instructions, and go into orbit.
Before we start saying how these rocket scientists messed up, and they did mess up, we have to keep realizing just how tough these projects are. That we're doing things out there in space every time we do it that no one even thought was possible a few years or decades ago.
The search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Huge radio telescopes aimed at the sky. Their purpose? To capture radio signals from alien civilizations. But the program is shrouded in secrecy.
I think if our government knew that we got signals, a dedicated signal from outer space somewhere, they'd clamp a lid on it.
Our source, a space program engineer, knows the risks.
If the powers that be knew I was talking to you, there would be a high price for me to pay.
After years of denying the existence of UFOs, the government abruptly decides to spend millions on searching for aliens. But there's a catch.
It's very hard to believe that the government would allow something this extraordinary to be released to the general public without scrutiny and censorship.
In the Mojave Desert, the government set up Goldstone Station on a military base.
It's RF quiet, which means there's not a lot of background noise when they're looking for signals. It's really ideal for this type of search.
Soon after coming online, the telescopes picked up signals called hits.
There were hits that were taken seriously. There were 3-4 hits, to my knowledge, that were strong, and it could potentially be a signal from an extraterrestrial intelligence.
Then, the government suddenly shut down the program.
It was a cheap shot for the budget posers, for the so-called deficit hawks. It's always easier to make fun of something that you or enough of your constituents don't understand.
But some experts take issue with that explanation.
If they embrace the concept of looking for alien signals, they also have to acknowledge the fact that the alien signals are coming from an extraterrestrial intelligence somewhere. And for certain people, that's not something that they want to either believe in or allow anybody to know that they believe in.
Some people believe the National Security Agency killed SETI because it feared the public would panic.
Their history and action in the past is a good warning of what they would do if something like this happened.
SETI was resurrected by several major corporations and renamed Project Phoenix. But the government maintained a strong, though unpublicized, presence.
If the hits do come down, they will be suppressed, and I don't think anybody will take a chance. The government would never make that leap of faith that the public would be able to handle the fact that we are receiving intelligence signals from another race, creature, something from somewhere else.
Next on Unexplained Mysteries, the Air Force officer who saw a number of UFOs.
My gosh, those are flying saucers. Those things really do exist.
Or were they experimental military planes?
lot of people say they're from deep space, but they could just as easily be from this world.
Find out how the military dealt with questions about the aircraft.
They had no record of such an aircraft ever existed.
And we get to the truth about the UFO conspiracy in the UNX Report, next on Unexplained Mysteries. Unexplained Mysteries, Undercover UFOs. Reports are increasing of UFOs spotted at air bases, but with a striking difference. These craft are on the ground. MacDill Air Force Base, Florida, 1967. An officer witnesses an inconceivable sight.
We were near a restricted area of the base, and all of a sudden we saw 4 aircraft parked out there, and our immediate reaction to each other was, my gosh, those are flying saucers. Those things really do exist.
Pickett published the Air Force Base newspaper. He wanted to do an article about the craft he'd seen, including photos.
I was called up to the Adjutant General's office. He went over to a file cabinet and got out a whole bunch of photographs. And he proceeded to lay these photographs out on a large table so that I could look at them. Well, of course, my interest perked up instantly when I began to see literally hundreds of photographs of all types of quote-unquote flying saucers.
The Air Force refused to allow Pickett to publish the article. That night, eyewitnesses in Miami reported a large number of UFO sightings. At the airbase the next day, the flying saucers were gone. The images have haunted Pickett for years. Desperate for some kind of explanation, he recently contacted former Air Force intelligence officer George Filer.
A lot of people say, well, how can something be kept secret for 50 years? Well, I point out that the F-117 stealth fighter was kept secret for approximately 10 years. And most of us didn't know that it existed until the government released the information.
I pointedly asked him, not only are these where the flying saucers stories came from, is this what they were? And he said, yes. Well, I was awestruck. I couldn't really believe I was seeing what I was seeing. Some of those photographs had many, many aircraft in them, and they were all easily identifiable as Air Force photographs are. And I asked him, well, how high and how fast could these things go? You hear all these stories. And he said, well, this particular aircraft could go fast enough and high enough to actually achieve space flight. And I had no idea when he was telling me this story that wouldn't be too long before they were declared non-existent.
To this day, Pickett is determined to prove what he saw was real.
This is an illustration of one of the largest ones parked down. In fact, it was the largest. It was nearly 100 feet across.
But when Pickett tried recently to get the photographs and documentation of the craft, the Air Force said no.
When I initially wrote, I began to get answers back. They didn't have the faintest idea of what I was talking about. I got letters from high-ranking officers that they had no record of such an aircraft ever existing. So I knew that it was top secret again.
Many UFO experts believe the technology for the saucer-shaped aircraft came from an alien spaceship that crashed near Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. At that time, if the military had recovered a downed UFO, they would have transported it to Wright-Patterson Air Base